Well, hello, everyone. I am so excited to officially welcome you to today's USA Virtual Gap Year Fair. We are thrilled to be hosting you this afternoon. Just a quick note before we get started, I wanted to remind you that while this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all registered participants, the provider info sessions following the webinar are not recorded. So definitely be sure to check those out so you don't miss any important content. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us live today and coming prepared with questions. I'm super excited for what we have in store. And I wanted to just take a really quick minute to introduce myself so you know who's speaking at you. My name is Claire Ling, and I'm the Outreach and Events Coordinator for USA Gap Year Fairs and Go Overseas. You'll see in some of these photos here that I've taught abroad with Fulbright, advised international TEFL trainees, worked with Gap Year students in Costa Rica, you name it. So needless to say, gap years in international education is something I'm really passionate about, and I'm thrilled more than anything to be here today to help you achieve the gap year adventure of your dreams. Quick note also, my fantastic colleague Drew is joining us as well and helping out behind the scenes, manning the slides and dropping links throughout this webinar. Thank you so much, Drew. Wonderful. This event is hosted by Go Overseas, which you can think of as Yelp, but for meaningful travel experiences. On gooverseas.com, you can browse programs, read verified alumni reviews, and explore other resources such as articles, guides, and scholarships. If you're inspired today to take the leap and start planning your gap year, this is a great place to do your research and find your best fit program. And before we really dive into the afternoon's core programming, just a quick overview of what to expect today. So we'll start off the event with a Gap Year 101 webinar, which you're in right now, given by the Gap Year Counselor Extraordinaire, Holly Bull of the Center for Interim Programs. Then you'll get to interact with Gap Year program providers during the actual virtual fair, and Holly and I will be in the Ask an Expert Help Center throughout, in case you have any questions or just want to continue the Gap Year 101 conversation. So speaking of the Help Center, something I want to highlight, which will be your best friend throughout the entire virtual fair, is the Attendee Hub, which we're dropping a link to right now. So please bookmark this page because this is going to be your home base for the entire virtual fair experience. You'll use the Zoom links inside the hub to access providers' info sessions and Q&As. But if you ever lose your link to your hub, don't worry. You can always find it in your Zoom reminder emails for this event. Before I introduce our amazing speaker for this evening, I wanted to take a quick moment to share a few super helpful gap links with you all to check out before, during, and after this event. So first up is our Gap Matcher tool. And you guys, I am so excited about this one. I personally think it's the coolest thing and such a great resource for today. So the Gap Matcher is the official USA Gap Year Fair research tool designed to generate a list of personalized gap year program suggestions based on you. If you still aren't quite sure which programs you'll be checking out during the fair, I'd invite you to actually take that Gap Matcher now in order to get your own customized list of programs to visit today. Next up, survey time. And definitely pay attention here because it's a fun one. So here at USA Gap Year Fairs, we're always looking to improve our content and make gap year information as accessible as possible. So that being the case, we'd love to hear about your experience today. If you complete this super quick survey within 24 hours of your event, you'll be entered for a chance to win $250. Really that simple. And finally, I'd encourage you all to visit the USA Gap Year Fair's landing page if you haven't done so already. There, you'll be able to register for more great gap year events like our new Gap Year Crash Course, more info on that to come, and find information on gap year articles and resources like the $5,000 Gap Year Scholarship will be launching on March 1st. So definitely keep your eyes peeled there. All right, and with that, I am finally going to go ahead and pass the mic over to who you've all been so patiently waiting for, our wonderful gap year counselor and consultant, Holly Bull of the Center for Interim Programs. Now, before Holly dives into it, I just want to remind everyone of that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit questions as you think of them, and we'll answer them at the end of the event. Without further ado, Holly, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Claire. And thank you, Drew, for moving the slides along here. And good evening, everyone. So I'm Holly Bull. As Claire said, you can put the next slide on. Drew, thank you. And I am a gap year counselor. I am the president of the Center for Interim Programs, and we are the oldest independent gap year counseling organization in the United States. So we've been doing this work longer than anyone. We started in 1980, and at this point have worked with over 8,000 students, actually all ages, but mostly students, since we started, and have a huge, just a database of program options that we've been using. and connections with programs, for years now. Next slide, please. And I'm personally very biased in favor of taking gap time, just for a lot of reasons. I mean, I've been steeped in this field ever since my father started this company. He had been a teacher and a headmaster for many years, and my brothers and I grew up traveling and living abroad in Turkey and Austria and different parts of the United States. And he was just collecting program ideas back in the 60s and threw them into a shoebox for about 20 years, and then started Interim here in Princeton, New Jersey, which is where I'm based. When he started the company, I was graduating from high school at the time, so I took a gap year myself, and the picture that you see there is me in sepia at 17 in Hawaii doing an aquaculture research institute internship, excuse me. And this was 4 months in the fall of my gap year, just getting a sense of whether or not this was a field I might want to major in or pursue as a career down the line, and realized, no, I don't. And then in the spring, I went to Greece on an academic cultural study program, and then went to college with, way more vigor, really excited about learning for its own sake. And then I took another gap year after my sophomore year. So these are the times when people most typically take gap time, between high school and college, or sometimes a break during college. And my second gap year, I went to India and Nepal. I went back to Greece. I did service work in Kentucky, and then finished up with a major in anthropology, nice and broad, and then began working in this field, both as a director of the program in Greece that I attended for a couple of years, as well as working at Interim with my father as a gap year counselor. So I've been doing this work now for over 30 years, and I've worked with over 3,000 people at this point, midwifing them through this process. I'm also the parent of 2 gap year students. My stepdaughter, who's 28, took a gap year before college. My daughter, Leah, is on a gap year right now. And it's been interesting wearing the hat of both counselor and parent. I told her she didn't have to work with me, but she said it's fine. So it's been actually a lot of fun. And I'm really glad she took a gap year. She was pretty fried after last year. So again, very biased just with all this experience, and looking forward to telling you about some of the benefits and things to watch out for with a gap year. So next slide, please. So for me as a counselor, the core of this work and why I love it so much is that it's often a real shift for students at this stage in their lives, away from all the directives that are coming at us. I have to do this, I'm supposed to do that. What will people think? I've been put in school, I'm expected to go to college. I'm making this sound more negative, and I don't mean to knock formal academics. I've done a lot of formal academics, but the hands-on learning in conjunction with the formal classroom learning is ideal. And having this break away from sort of working from the outside in to leading from the core outward is really powerful. And you really are stepping back from sort of the oughts and the shoulds and just asking this sort of core question: what am I doing on this planet? Who am I? What am I interested in? And then I choose and own what I'm up to. And that is the beginning of personal power. If at 17, 18, 19, you can practice what it feels like to own your choices and experiment with that, without a lot of pressure, no grades really here. You're just going to have this freedom to get at sort of leading from the core, and everything flows from that. Next slide, please. So what is a gap year? This is just a chance to my mind to explore these interests and skills, but with intentionality. This is not a year off. This is not time off. This is very much time on and a year on. You have to be on because you're stepping into things that are really different, and you're very much alive. And people often say, I really come back alive. Typically it is between high school and college, or people taking a break from college. It really should be called gap time, because you don't have to take a year. Excuse me. So it could be, for some people, a semester, 3 months to up to 9 months or more. Next slide, please. And it's really for anyone, anybody who's interested, and all ages, as I said, and all different types of learning styles. And you don't have to be good at anything. The whole idea here is you're just exploring, and you're going to learn from everything. Next slide, please. So many benefits to taking this kind of time now. If you're choosing and owning something, if you get to do something you want to do, obviously you're going to be more self-motivated. And again, I think sometimes parents are seeing their children in the school setting, which they haven't really chosen, or they might be a little tired of by senior year, and the motivation is waning a bit. And so having some time to build that excitement and enthusiasm back up is really helpful. Or just time to rest. I see a lot of students by senior year who are pretty fried and tired of the onerous aspects of schooling. And so just rejuvenating in more than a summer. I don't know that a summer is sometimes enough time for people to fill back up and get out of the sort of really intense track some of them are on, and just offloading that stress. It really helps to have a bit more time. The relevance of your studies to the world, this is a big one for me. By senior year, I remember thinking, okay, here I go from math class to history to Spanish. How does this stuff connect? How is it relevant to the world around me? And so part of my gap year in Greece, everything I was studying was right under my nose, gave me that sense of relevance and excitement about learning for its own sake. And taking that into college was really helpful. Students are also becoming more financially aware. Parents can help with this. Hey, here's your budget. And students are learning how to budget because they're thinking about it more. And it's, college is kind of more set up often, but with gap time, you really are looking at the costs of things and navigating. And on a practical level, everything you do during this time goes on a resume. You're front loading skills that are probably going to be more useful for you in the work world beyond college than most classes. And this is often the missing piece because some people are really good at school or they're doing school and then they finish up and then suddenly they have to go get their job. And often people are graduating with a major and they still don't have a clue as to who they are, what they want to get at, or how to get at something. So having this time to go practice the in the world living skills, again, with more support and not as much pressure, is incredibly helpful. It helps students transition to college more easily and then transitioning from college into the work world more easily. Getting a sense of what you want to study in college or not is really helpful. In my case, it was not marine bio. And I think that also helps students not be trying to make those like career or major decisions in college from classes, because I don't think classes are a place that often will give you enough information about whether you have a passion for this field or what the field is really like. So just sticking your toe in the water of these different areas of interest during gap time can really give you that clarity. And then again, how you transition into the work world post-college is often much easier. Going back to the whole idea of getting this clarity, I had a young woman who was thinking about being a surgeon, and she spent just 4 weeks shadowing doctors in clinics and hospitals in Asia, standing at the shoulders of surgeons, watching surgeries. And she came home and told her parents, I don't think I'm going to be a surgeon. I will be a surgeon. And she had that clarity, and you knew nothing was going to get in her way. And also that kind of clarity helps you get jobs. How you show up as a human being is different when you have this sense of self and self-confidence that's palpable when you're in the presence of people who've taken this kind of time. It's like, yep, I can handle myself in the world. My stepdaughter, when she took her gap year before college, did an internship in Ireland. This is Samantha. And she was working for this little startup company for 3 months. And she finished up and they said, hey, Samantha, this was great. You could run this place. You're good at business. And she's like, I like business. Not sure I want to work with artists, because she was organizing an art co-op. But all of that was really helpful for her to know. She said, not only did it affect her gap year, how she took on college, just like hitting the ground running, but she said, I'm pretty sure I got my job with IBM right out of college based on that internship that I did at 19 in Ireland. She said, that's all we talked about during the interview. And they said, basically, Samantha, you got this job because of your gap year. Now, she was also a good student, but I think companies, employers are looking for more than just which college you go to and what GPA you have. They want to know if you can show up and do the work. The other thing Samantha said recently is she said that she has a coworker at IBM who was in college with her, who was a very good student. And Samantha said she's not actually doing that well in the job. She's a little entitled. She's not very proactive. So again, the skills that people have in school aren't always translating into the work world. These are down the line benefits, obviously, but people don't realize often how what you do during gap time stays with you all your life. You draw on these skills and experiences all your life. I have, and it's just a rich array of stuff that you have that you've front loaded at this stage in your life. Thank you. Next slide. All right, so this is a concern people have sometimes. How am I going to perform, or how will my child perform in college after stepping away from academics for a full year? And the myth is these students are going to lose academic momentum if they step away from formal studies, or maybe they're going to get derailed, meaning they won't go to college if they were planning to go to college. And the reality is, on average, these students are performing at higher GPA levels, as well as leadership skills and other things. But if you just look at GPAs, they're doing better than non-gap year students. It's also very rare if a student's intending to go to college that a gap year will derail them from that intent and process. What you're more likely to see is students going straight to college and then stepping out. It's like a third of college freshmen don't continue after their first, or it's their first year or second year. They don't return for the second year. I'm just looking at my notes here. And so that's something that sometimes high schools aren't focusing on. They're trying to get you into college, but they're not following up on students to see if they're staying there. So gap year students tend to be much more plugged in as students. And here's some of the data. This is older data. Next slide, please. That gives you a sense now that higher ed is paying attention to the quality of students showing up who's done a gap year. So this data is what, 2011 to 2014. So it's older data, but it pretty much mirrors more recent data. And it definitely mirrors anecdotal evidence that we have with our over 8,000 students at this point about people being better students. So Bob Claggett was in Harvard admissions for years, Dean of Admission at Middlebury College for about 7 years. And I've been on lots of gap year panels with Bob. And when he got to Middlebury, he said, I just started to track the GPAs of the gap year students, which are the blue lines there compared to the red. And what he saw is that these students were performing at higher, like it was several percentage points higher than their peers. And most of them hadn't done anything academic, formally academic during their gap year. So you can step away, you might be a little rusty, but you're not going to forget how to learn. And the likelihood is you are going to be doing better. The other thing that Bob noticed at Middlebury is that the Feb admits, the students who just had the fall away, and they hadn't chosen it really. It's not like these were special students taking gap time. Those students were offered the later admission. And he said a disproportionate number of those students, they were walking away with all the leadership awards at Middlebury. So I put it to you, it's all those benefits I was talking about, having to be more proactive, even in 3 months, like what do I do with my fall, affected how they took on Middlebury and that proactive energy they carried right into Middlebury. And the next slide is Bob's data on UNC Chapel Hill, very different university, even more dramatic results. The light blue are the GPAs of the gap year students, again, who weren't normally doing formal academics during their gap year. And then the next slide is Mark Hatch. He was also in Harvard admissions and now is in admissions at Colorado College. Colorado College has become a research hub for gap year in the last few years. So they're gathering a lot of data. And Mark is saying pretty much the same thing as Bob. GPAs are higher with these gap year students. This young man taking gap time outperforming non-gap year females is a comment he made at a big NACAC conference when I was on a gap year panel with him, and I was frantically writing it down. It's like, right, these young men are doing better than non-gap year female peers, which is statistically weird, and they're way outperforming non-gap year male peers. And he said these students are leaders on campus. They don't have the same behavioral issues and dramas, roommate issues don't derail them. They just really do hit the ground running, and they finish college in 4 years or fewer. I don't know if you know this, but the average number of years to finish college is typically 5 or 6 because people are changing majors, they're changing schools. Again, they're trying to figure out where their passions are through more classes. And he said, our goal is to have 20% of the incoming freshman class have taken a gap year. They might be at 12% now. They're also now looking at the levels of anxiety and depression going down in gap year students, and disciplinary incidents, especially in young men, freshman year, going down. Again, just students are happier, less pressed when they have this time to regroup, reset, and mature a bit before heading on to college or to the work world beyond, whatever they're doing beyond high school. Okay, next slide, please. So I was telling you about, 4 years versus 5 or 6. So if you just look at the savings in tuition, a private college, out-of-state tuition, you could be saving $30,000 if you take a gap year and finish in 4 years. Versus 6 or 76,000. You will not likely spend anything close to that on a gap year. I mean, you could if you want to, but normally you don't have to. And so, and even if you have a gap year where it's all room and board placements, you're still getting those same benefits that will make you a more efficient student. That's what I've seen over the years of working with so many students. Next slide, please. These are some of the universities that actually run gap year programs or have scholarships. And this doesn't mean that other universities don't support the gap year, but these actually have created programs like Princeton's Bridge Year program, which has been running for a number of years now. They actually had me come in and counsel with them when they were creating this program about, programs to partner with and what it was like working with this age range, et cetera. This is like a Peace Corps year almost before students start 4 years at Princeton. Tufts has the 1+4 program, that service work they're doing. You've got the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and then Florida State and Duke is the most recent. And a lot of the funding for these programs is coming from alumni donors, so families that are realizing the value of gap time in their students and wanting the universities to support it. Next slide, please. All right, so some of the pitfalls and challenges, ideally you don't want to force a gap year on somebody. It belies the whole power of choosing. I sometimes have parents drag their child into my office, and I can often turn the student toward it because I think people often don't realize what a gap year is and what they can do. And, and so often they'll say, great, I didn't realize this is what I would be about. But if they say, I really don't want to do this, ideally, they shouldn't be forced into it. You want to also make sure that you're landing in placements that are well run. It's nice to be as safe as you can be in this world, or not wasting time on a dud placement that's not well organized, et cetera. And then the year as a whole, sometimes people are doing one program for the whole year, but many students are doing combinations of things. So you really want to make sure you don't have too many gaps during your gap year and that you have enough going on with the breaks in between during that time. Twiddling your thumbs at home without enough to do is not a great gap year. The negative feedback or articles that I've read on students not liking their gap year were ones who didn't put the planning into it and ended up at home. And that is not, as I said, a great way to spend your gap time, unless you want to. So the challenges are, it does take work. There are definitely more moving parts. College is all laid out for you. It requires you to be more proactive, want to be engaged in that process. And it is an untraditional path, so you may need more support and guidance. Also, students are changing and plans are changing. I always lay out a scenario for my students, but invariably halfway through the year, they're shifting because you have no idea where your head's going to be, say, come this November, if you take a gap year. So you want to be able to tinker with your plans as you go. And then, how to afford the gap time. I'll talk about this more with types of programs. As I said, you don't have to bleed financially to have a great gap year. There are different ways of working with it, and scholarships and so forth. Okay, next slide, please. So here's what I hear from students. I don't want to get behind my high school class. Or am I going to be too old, as a college freshman? So really common. And I never mean to discount how people feel. However, it really is very rare that these fears play out the way gap year students fear. So the reality is, you're on a parallel track. So if you're heading off to a gap year this fall, if you're a senior, and your friends are heading off to college or whatever they're doing, you really are on this parallel track because often you're connecting in with students who are also on a gap year program or experience. So you're not disconnecting from that peer group. And all I can tell you is with my gap year when I was in Hawaii, where I wasn't with my peers, I was so glad to be there doing what I was doing. Once the glow of college wore off, a lot of my friends were drooling over what I was doing. And, I wasn't drooling over what they were doing in school. So as long as you have something you're going toward, it's a lot easier. It's like once okay, yes, this is what I'm getting at this fall, you're not going to be worrying about so much about what you may be missing in college. And the reality is, even if you graduate a year later than your peers, you are so far ahead of the game in terms of skills that you're getting that will make it easier for you transitioning into the work world, as I was talking about before. And not that this is a competition, but that's the reality. You're not behind by any means. Now, you are going to be more mature when you land in college after taking gap time. There's no question about it. So, but I've never had anybody say, Holly, I wish I had done a gap year because I was too old as a college freshman. My stepdaughter said, I was the go-to person in my dorm. She said, I liked it. I definitely felt when I landed in college after my gap year that I saw a lot of people kind of run by the mob, trying to fit in, and I just didn't feel that. So again, that's that personal power in terms of how you land and make college work for you without being intimidated, without feeling like you're trying to fit in or doing things and just sort of not sure what you're up to because you're coming out of high school and home. It's the benefits so far outweigh a bit of a disjoint if you feel older than your freshman class and you're not as age bound in college. So you're not just going to be aligned with your freshman class, you're going to meet people for all ages. And there are way more gappers in college now than when I did my gap year, which helps as well. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks. All right, so when I say programs, and I call everything a program, the placements, the options that are out there, 4 main categories. This is the first one. And many of these you'll see at the fair today. These facilitated group programs specifically set up for gap year students, where you're with peers and leaders, 10 to 12 students, say, and leaders, lots of structure and support. And it could be, a cultural study program where you're doing homestays and service projects, adventure travel, sightseeing, and a nice curriculum that's varied in Central South America or Africa or Asia or New Zealand, Australia, if they ever open back up to us. I think they're opening up later this year. And so it could be one of those. It could be art history focused or studio art focused. It could be outdoor adventure. The slide to the left there, the picture, marine related options, some academic programs as well in this category. So my daughter Leah did an outdoor ed program last fall with a group of peers outside for 3 months, not much contact, on her phone, loved it. Just really great, rejuvenating and challenging experience. Okay, next slide, please. By the way, the group programs, they run typically, they can be as short as a month, but typically more like 2 to 3 months or full year programs. And you're paying some overarching fee or tuition for those. And they have scholarships, many of them. Second category here are what I call the skill-based intensives. So these are shorter, 1 to 4 weeks where you're with a range of ages, housing still set up for you. So you are dropping in and getting a lot of information fast or a certification. So it could be, I think Drew said he's getting his TEFL, his teaching English as a foreign language certification. Is that right, Drew, in Prague coming up soon? Or it could be, getting your instructor certification for skiing or snowboarding or yoga, or you're getting your dive master, scuba certification, or the wilderness EMT, medical training, or cooking intensives that you're doing, or writing intensives, or maybe you're learning how to run a recording studio or doing filmmaking classes. And these are US and abroad. So you can tuck these into gap time or breaks down the line. I always tell people, systematically pick off your interests, these core interests you have one by one through gap experiences, college classes, breaks in college, do more exploring post-college. Your teens and 20s, you're not tied to much. Now is a time in your life when you want to explore as widely as possible. And this is not goof off time, as I said before. Okay, next slide. Third category here, very particular category, urban internships. These are specifically set up for you by your internship providers typically, and you are often living in shared housing with fellow interns, and then you're engaging in a job-like placement during the day. So you've got the landing pad in place, but once you're launched, basically you're living the way you're going to live post-college at 18 or 19. And this is what my stepdaughter Samantha did in Ireland and what my daughter Leah is doing right now in Africa. There are also 2 hybrid programs, and there may be more, but 2 that I'm just thinking of right now, where you're with a group of gap year peers who are interns. So a little more structure and support, and it could be in Israel or in the United States. And the pictures that you're seeing there are actually from the one in the US. So the internships can vary widely: automotive, legal work, research, teaching. I have students right now who are working in refugee centers, so it could be volunteer type work. My daughter's doing work with a human rights lawyer right now. We have people working in startup companies, breweries, just learning businesses. So, arts related things. So it's a great half step into the work world if you want to get a sense of what a field might be like. And you do pay for these. They're well worth it for what you're getting. A couple $1,000 plus housing and food costs. Okay, last slide. On the programs, these are all the volunteer options. So these are all over the world, all different lengths of time, more rural than urban. Many of them give you housing and food in exchange for your labor, or there's a minimal cost for your housing and food. And you could be working with animals, wild or domestic. You could be coaching kids in sports or helping in classrooms, on board tall ships, helping on a farm, a ranch. And because these are so flexible, you can weave them into different parts of your gap time. Sometimes students will wait and do these more toward the second part of a gap year because they are more independent. But some of them will give you a lot of structure and support, like in a community. So for example, if you wanted to do trail work in the United States, it gives you a community of people in their teens and 20s, typically, housing and food and daily work. It's not glamorous work, but it's really good work. Or disaster relief work, helping to rebuild post-hurricane, earthquake, or fire damage. community of students, engaging volunteers in the US and abroad. Okay, next slide, please. So this is what a year can look like. Obviously, this is not a blueprint for how it has to be, but you'll see this sample gap year shows you how it can follow pretty much a school calendar so that you're still coming home as you normally would if you were in college, and so see friends and family and then take off again. So you've got nice breaks in between to tinker with your plans. Generally, students are doing their own thing in the summer, work a job, see friends, family, etc., and then head out on something ideally that will fill the fall. Often students are doing more of the group programs in the fall, I find. And then winter to spring, maybe more independent placements, the internships, the service work, and so forth. Sometimes students will apply or reapply to college halfway through a gap year. This is not a guarantee, but it does put you in a different bracket as far as colleges are concerned, because they're going to see your full senior year, so keep grades level or up, and you can speak from part of your gap year. It's not a guarantee, but it does help, and it has helped some students. One young woman who applied last year, which was a horrible year to apply, she said, I got in one school and I was waitlisted every place else. She said, I'm going to reapply halfway through my gap year. She just told me she just got into a school that she was waitlisted at. She's really happy, the first time around, and now she's in. Okay, next slide. All right, so when do you start planning your gap year? At the latest by spring of senior year. So a lot of seniors will do the college applications in the fall and then start focusing on their gap year plans in the spring right now. And there's still time to set up a great gap year. Deadlines aren't as early as for college, so you don't need as much lead time. You can start planning earlier. I think when sophomores and juniors at least know this is an option, it's really helpful just to know you have options. So, my stepdaughter and daughter were filling out our interest sheet when they were about 6 years old. That's a little early, but you get the idea that ideally this should just be part of the array of options you have to consider. But having said that, yes, you can wait until senior year. Start checking, college deferral requirements. Some colleges will say, fine, take your gap year, but don't garner college credit. Some, if they have scholarships or financial aid they've given you, can defer it, and some can't or won't. And so it's college by college. You really want to check with your college. I talked about the option of reapplying during a gap year. And another way, you don't have to work with a gap year counselor, but it's really helpful just to brainstorm with those of us who do this, especially if we're offering a free brainstorming session, just because this is all we do. So to get some more input and reassurance, et cetera. It doesn't obligate you to work with us counselors who do this, but I think it can be very helpful. And you ideally, in terms of starting the process, lead from the core interests. Where in the world might I want to go? And what are my areas of interest? And the survey that Claire had you do, it's like, okay, travel, Europe. Maybe I want to do, what was it? Something people were talking about, language acquisition or academic credit. These basic things you want to just start weaving in and matching with existing program options. Make sure your passport's updated. Typically, gap year students are traveling as tourists. So you have up to about 3 months, most places in the world, where you can travel and you don't need to get special visas or anything like that. And if you have medications or you need mental health support, just make sure those things are in place as you step into the planning of this year. Next slide, please. Thank you, Drew. All right, I talked about costs. I think it's really helpful for parents to sit down with students and say, here's what we can comfortably or are willing to put toward your gap time, so that the students really start thinking about budgeting. Or if you're really on a tight budget, ask group programs about scholarships. You've got 529 plans sometimes that you can use. And I just did an interview with a family before this fair, and the mom said, can we use our 529 money for her year? And I said, yeah, there are a lot of the group programs are accredited. So you could probably pull the 529 plan money into that to pay for it. You may not get the credit, especially if the college you're deferring from says, nope, no credit. So, but you can use the money for it and get the experience. Do your crowdfunding. A lot of people live vicariously through gap year students, set up a blog and then ask everybody for graduation money, fund my gap year. And then work, even if students don't have to, I often recommend them work to help pay for this year. It's your year. Now, I paid for all the airfare during my year, round trip Hawaii, round trip Greece, one program volunteer, one program that was the tuition, the splurge for my parents. It was a reasonable year. And with two older brothers in college before me, it was really helping them out. So the costs, as you saw, really range widely from nothing, and you just have to get yourself somewhere. And then it's housing and food provided for your work to, all the way on up to 20,000 plus for a semester, depending on the programs. So it really runs the gamut. Next slide, please. All right, so I just like this, this image, it's kind of silly, but really, if you look at the top here, our plan, this is very much sort of Western focused culture, linear, goal-oriented. Here's our academic track, our life plan, our gap year plan. And quite frankly, the reality of our lives is what you see below there. It's all the ups and downs, dealing with COVID, the changes, but it's also the richness of your life experience. And this is what you're front loading now. You students don't realize it's so much harder as you get older to take this kind of time where you're not a tourist. You're not trying to do like a 2-week vacation. I mean, if you're lucky, you take a 2-week vacation in this manic work culture that we're in. But this is a well of time where you're getting at all these experiences. And this image always reminds me of a poem that I loved in Greece when I was on my gap year. We were studying Cavafy's poem of Ithaca with, Odysseus trying to get home to Penelope in Ithaca. And at somewhere in the poem, Cavafy says, don't rush the journey. Ithaca is giving you this. You want to meet all the people in the world, the Lastrygonians, and fight the Cyclops and smell all the perfumes in the world and go to all the ports in the world. That's what it's all about. So all I can tell you is there's so many parents who want to do gap time when I talk to their students. This is like a jewel of a period of time in your life to do this kind of exploring. Okay, next slide. So I think we're done here. So again, for those of you who popped in later, I'm Holly Bull. I'm an accredited gap year counselor based here in Princeton, New Jersey, work with students all over the US and around the world. And I'm happy to speak with people further if they want to. But I think if we have time now, Claire, let me know. We can do some Q&A before I'll then be in the expert or the Ask an Experts box, which Claire will talk to you about. So thank you all very much. I'm happy to take some questions if there's time.
Thank you so much, Holly. That was a wonderful presentation, and I always learn so much every time I tune in. We are just about at the very end of our hour, so we might have time for one very, very quick question. I do believe, though, the 2 questions that are asked here in the Q&A we got to. So can 529 accounts be used towards gap years? Holly, I know you touched on that. Yes.
Right. Accredited programs, they have to be an accredited program. And you can be with the same people the whole gap year if you do a full gap year program, but you don't have to be because you may be doing combinations of experiences. So you could be with, people all different ages or just peers. It's your choice.
Great. Thank you so much for speeding through those 2 questions. And I'm glad that we were able to get them answered again. Drew, I think you can go ahead and start sharing those slides again. And a quick reminder too, I really encourage everybody. I know people come with questions and that is great. So please do come visit Holly in the Ask an Expert Help Center. That is such a great opportunity to be able to really, hone your expertise and chat with our amazing counselors. So get all those questions answered there. Okay, and another really great way to connect with Holly and our other fabulous gap year experts and counselors is our new crash course series, which is how to take a gap year. So this crash course brings together expert gap year counselors and gap year alumni in an engaging series of panel style events with live Q&A. It's the perfect complement to this virtual fair, and you only need to pre-register once using the link that Drew just dropped into the chat to receive access to these 7 super informative events. Okay, and onwards to my final reminder for the night or evening, wherever you're tuning in from, which is to utilize your attendee hub. Drew is dropping the link to that hub one more time in the chat. And again, you'll use the Zoom links in the hub to navigate into the info sessions and Q&As of our fantastic lineup of gap year program providers. So now, without further ado, it's time to kick off the fair. This is your chance to connect with program providers, so I really recommend you unmute your mics and chat with the presenters. They're really looking forward to meeting you. Thank you all so much again for joining us, and I wish you a fabulous fair. I also selfishly hope that a lot of you will join us in that Ask an Expert Center so that we can continue our conversation today. Thank you, everyone.